Congressman Michael Burgess, thank you so much and welcome back to Eye on Politics.
Thanks for having me, Jack. I appreciate it.
You bet. So, this is the last full month of your last term in office in Congress. What's going through your mind?
Well, there is so much work still ahead in these next few weeks that it really hasn't settled in on me that come January 3rd, for the first time since 1972, I'm going to be looking for work. But yeah, it does come to an end at noon on January 3rd. But between now and then, there's an enormous amount of work to get through. And of course, being chairman of the Rules Committee, most of that is going to come through our committee room.
Do you have any second thoughts about your decision to retire, given the fact that Donald Trump is going to be president again and the Republicans are going to have a trifecta?
Yeah, if I do have second thoughts, and my sciatic nerve quickly reminds me that those airline flights are starting to wear on me.
So that would be a no.
That would be a no.
You are, as Rules Committee Chairman, are going to be receiving an official portrait.
That's correct.
And not every member of Congress gets that, only the committee chairs.
That's correct.
And so I'm wondering, what do you think about that?
Well, it's even more than that, because the Rules Committee, as you know, meets in the Capitol. So the hearing room is in the Capitol. So it's not just a portrait in an office building across the street. It's a portrait in the Capitol of a Texan. That's important to me.
And people are going to be saying all these nice things about you, I would imagine. So, I mean, how would you describe you've been in Congress a long time. You were elected in 2002.
That's right.
And so what comes to mind about how would you describe your years in office?
Well, look, there's various aspects of it. The constituent service part was really not something that I thought about a lot when I first ran, but it's one of the most important parts of the job. And we don't brag about them. I treat constituent service much in the same way I treated my medical practice. You obviously don't talk about patients when you're in a medical practice, but we've done a number of tremendous things. And every time I'm out somewhere, in fact, Senator Cruz had a big rally right before the November election, and there were 3 or 4 people came up to me and say, "You don't remember, but you helped me with Social Security, with the VA, with getting my kid in the Service Academy." Those sorts of things are what people really remember you for at home, which, after all, we don't run for these jobs to be a Washington representative. We run for them to be the representative for our friends and neighbors, the people we grew up with.
So what would you say your greatest accomplishments are? What stands out most to you?
There are several. One that I point to not infrequently is the fact that one of our biggest, most pressing needs in this area is going to be water. The people who did planning and thought about things in the 40s and 50s actually provided us the ability for the Metroplex to grow the way it has because of the ability to get water. When I was a kid and my parents first moved here in the early 1950s, there was a terrible drought. It didn't rain for 7 years. The water infrastructure that existed at that time in no way would have supported the growth that the Metroplex has seen. Now, did I get a new lake? No, I didn't. There's not going to be a lake named after me. But there was a crisis with our existing Garza Little Elm Lake Louisville that the dam had not just 1, not just 2, but 3 seepage areas, which were going to cause big trouble down the road. And they needed help getting the financing for that, and I threw myself into that. We also got a rock slide on the dam repaired, and they're just about to finish up putting in new anchors in the spillway, which the design specs in 1957 weren't quite what are required today. And so there's been a lot of improvements on that dam. So I point to that and I say, well, you didn't get a new lake, but you didn't lose your old lake. And that's terribly important for the growth and stability of the area.
And I remember in 2015 we had record flooding.
That's correct.
Off of Lake Louisville. And so when you talk about that really speaks to the importance of getting it right.
The lake is there for flood control. Again, back when I was a kid, you would always hear the terrible stories of the flooding that would occur down in Dallas. And a lot of that, of course, was Trinity River, Hickory Creek flooding that would go downstream. So the flood control aspect has worked phenomenally well. Dallas Water Utilities owns most of the water in the lake. And so that has allowed, with their parceling that out to various municipalities, that has worked well for the growth in the area. So really the lake has been it was a phenomenal asset for this area back in 1957. And part of my job was to make certain that it stayed up to date and we didn't lose it.
And let me ask you about, you talked about the work that still has to be done before you leave Congress. I would imagine the budget is still, there has to be a budget deal worked out.
There does.
So talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, first off, let me just say I don't think there will be an appropriations lapse. Media refers to that as a government shutdown. I don't think that is going to happen. There doesn't seem to be any appetite for that going into a new Trump administration. You don't want to leave them in a situation of fiscal chaos right as you start a new Congress and a new administration. So something will get done, whether that will be a 3-month continuing resolution or a continuing resolution to the end of the budget year, which is September 30th. I don't know which it will be. The Speaker has said we're not going to have an omnibus bill done in December of this year, so I take him at his word. I mean, he, after all, is going to have to stand for another Speaker election in the first week of January, so that I'm sure that's on his mind as well. But something will happen, and it's likely to be a continuing resolution, which is not a great way to govern, but it likely will be a continuing resolution. And then the question is it till March? Is it till February? Is it till September? And there are a lot of moving parts there.
I have to ask you about the national debt, which has just increased to over $36 trillion. Now that you're leaving Congress, what do you think has to be done to get spending under control?
Let me tell you one of the things I'm most excited about for the new administration. Yeah, they're going to have some hard decisions to make, but the fact that they're putting a priority on government efficiency is really something I have never seen in my 22 years there, and I've wished we would. There's plenty of places where, look, this is there'd be a better way to do this. But now that this administration coming in, that is going to be their goal. That's one of the areas where they're going to focus. There are some places, and I'm not going to cite specific ones, but there are some places you can actually save money. Any continuation of an existing federal program, you can require it to be paid for. You can require it to be offset. I did that in 2017, 2018 with the state children's health insurance program. Most people don't remember that was about to expire. All of the stories that were written were, what's going to happen to the children. We did a 10-year extension of children's health insurance, but the most important thing to me was not just the length of it, but it was completely offset. Found money, found duplication and inefficiency within the Medicaid system itself that allowed that to the Congressional Budget Office said this will more than pay for the 10-year extension of children's health. And that's the proper way to approach it. I wish we did more things that way. There seems to be an aversion to finding offsets, but in a federal budget that's as large as ours is, there are plenty of places where you can save money.
And basically, you're talking about when offsets, making sure that it's not adding
That's
to
correct.
spending, it's living within the budget.
And the interesting thing about that, even back in 2018, I don't think I got a single Democrat to vote with me on that because of the offset. They did not. They wanted to simply, let's do 10 years extension of children's health, but let's just pay for it with future debt. No, let's pay for it right now. We can do it. We have the money. Don't let it go to some other squirrely project. Children are important. Let's use it for that. And fortunately for me, I was able to make that case, and it did pass both the House and Senate. President Trump signed it into law in 2018.
You're a doctor. You've billed yourself as a doctor in the House. And so
I wrote a book.
you wrote a book about it, right, with that title. So let me ask you, I know there's been a lot of back and forth about President-elect Trump's nominee, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for HHS Secretary, Health and Human Services. What do you make of that?
Well, look, it's I mean, and many of the things he said are the things that I have been advocating for my time in Congress. There's a bill right now that I'm on the Budget Committee. It passed through the Budget Committee and it passed the entire House of Representatives. It was the first bipartisan budget bill to pass the House of Representatives since the 1974 Budget Act. So this was a pretty big deal for me. The purpose of the bill is to say that in the realm of preventive health, Congressional Budget Office always will put a big score on some of these projects. But in preventive health, yeah, the first 10 years is always going to be the cost. It's the next 10 years and the 10 years after that where the savings are going to accrue. So the bill that I passed through the House and is waiting activity in the Senate, are you listening, Rand Paul? Are you listening, Chuck Grassley? But this bill would allow the Congressional Budget Office, under certain parameters, to score something in a longer time frame than 10 years. Most preventive health does not occur neatly in a 10-year window. And since we're under that constraint in the Congressional Budget Office, a lot of talk today about some of the weight loss drugs. Well, if you were to do a program of that, whether it be just in Medicare or Medicare and Medicaid, enormously expensive for the first 10 years. But the next 10 years and the next 10 years, with lowered rates of diabetes, lowered rates of heart disease, there's actually going to be significant savings. We can't even talk about that right now because in our budget process, it has to be encompassed in a 10-year window. Now, there's some other things, and I would love to go back and open up parts of the ACA, the Affordable Care Act. We called it Obamacare at the time. It never has performed the way it was supposed to in a 10-year budget window. Remember, President Obama sold it to the country and he said this is going to save $142 billion over 10 years in the budget. And you can't touch any part of it or you'll upset that savings that this finely tuned bill is going to deliver. Well, the answer is that was nonsense. It's not delivering any savings. The cost is phenomenally more than anyone ever projected. And I'll tell you what, the next Congress is going to have to deal with the increase in the advanced premium tax credit, the so-called subsidies in the marketplace plans. That it was plussed up in the American Rescue Plan and then again in the Inflation Reduction Act, but that is coming to an end, and that's going to hurt and hit middle-class families really hard. Someone needs to be thinking about what we do about that.
How does it going to hit the middle-class families hard?
Well, look,
Premiums?
yes, the premiums. One of the reasons I worked so hard on trying to do something in place of the Affordable Care Act in 2017 was because every day of the week that I was in the office, I would have someone come in and tell me, I cannot afford the insurance you're requiring me to buy. Remember, there was an individual mandate. You had to buy the insurance. The cost was inexorably going up, and patients were just getting hurt bad on that. If they were outside the subsidy window, which was $96,000 a year for a family of four, in this district, that's a teacher and a policeman with two kids. They were outside the subsidy window, and those premium increases just hammered them. So rather than look at a way, how do we deliver care at a more efficient pace, President Biden's answer to that was, well, let's just blow that subsidy level up to from $96,000 a year to $250,000 a year. I think their goal was to do away with employer-sponsored health insurance. They haven't. That's still the insurance of record for 190 million Americans. But that subsidy is also going to go away. That's going to leave a lot of middle-class families exposed because what have the insurance companies done? They say, increased subsidy, increased premium. So they just jacked up the cost of the benchmark silver plan every year since that subsidy increase has been available. And now the premium expense is going to be phenomenal.
So what's the solution without dumping it all on the middle class? Whether they can even afford the program anymore.
Well, the first thing, and this didn't happen in the healthcare bill that we tried to do, that did pass the House, I want to stress, but didn't pass the Senate. But removing the individual mandate was a big part of relief on that. That was in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017. It didn't go completely away. My opinion, it needs to be repealed, but at least it was paused, and so no one is actually hurt by the individual mandate. So the individual mandate, with that going away, it allowed people to have a little bit more flexibility. And the one thing that Trump did was just absolutely brilliant. And I don't think anybody saw this as brilliant at the time. But remember, in the Affordable Care Act, President Obama had said, I want people to go into the marketplace. I'm going to force them into the marketplace, individual mandate, and you can't buy a limited duration plan for longer than 30 days. Well, Trump expanded limited duration coverage to 364 days and then allowed it to be renewed 3 or 4 times, effectively allowing more competition for insurance premiums. And guess what happened? Premiums went down. They went down dramatically in October of 2017. We were all fearful of what was going to happen when the next round of marketplace premiums came out. What was it going to look like? Well, the answer was it was pretty muted, because the things that President Trump had done in his first term, which had really kept the lid on insurance premiums. Who's done the best under the Affordable Care Act? Insurance companies have done phenomenally well. People who own stock in insurance companies have done phenomenally well. It's time to reapportion that. With one of the things that the Affordable Care Act was a transfer payment from middle-class families to someone else. Now let's do that transfer payment from the insurance companies, make more flexible insurance available to people. Yes, health savings accounts would be a big part of that, but you've got to expand the insurance options and choices for middle-class families and for the uninsured as well.
Now, is this tied to the Trump tax cuts that are set to expire in 2025 or no?
No, it's not. Removing the restrictions on limited duration plans was an executive order. Now, President Biden, you would have thought the same day he reversed the Keystone Pipeline, he would have also reversed that. He did, because it would have put a lot of pressure on people again, and they didn't want that going into the midterms. He finally did issue an executive order reversing that, but they haven't actually done it yet. It's still tied up at the agency. And the reason they haven't is because it would quickly become enormously unpopular politically, and you don't want to go into an election cycle with all the baggage that they were carrying. You wouldn't want to have had to carry that as well.
2 other questions. I wanted to ask you about something that everybody's talking about as we speak, and that is President Biden pardoning, giving a full pardon to his son, Hunter. What do you think about that?
Well, as a dad, I understand it. I wish my dad had had the ability to get me out of some scrapes I got myself into as a teenager. But Hunter Biden, not a teenager, he's a full-grown adult. It's, if I say it's understandable from just the father-son aspect, it is. But oh my gosh, how many people are actually serving prison sentences having done exactly the same things, excuse me, that Hunter Biden did? So it does. There's an enormous amount of unfairness to that. And the other thing is that, and it's just hard to escape, how many times has President Biden gotten in our face and said, pay your fair share of taxes? His own family wasn't paying their fair share of taxes. So my rejoinder to that was, well, let's start with the first family paying their fair share. And the avoidance of tax that Hunter Biden went through, not just avoidance, not just finding deductions that were questionable, just absolute non-payment of taxes on these phenomenal amounts of money he got for these business deals. Well, all of that now has gone away, and it's and partially it's a shame that the American people will not know the extent that the committee work that was done in the Oversight Committee on the suspicious activity reports at banks. Clearly there was a lot of activity done in order to avoid having to disclose the amount of money that was coming into the first family. That's the real tragedy here. And the fact that you have other people in jail for very similar crimes right now, it just makes you question the whole fairness of the system. And people who say Republicans are overreacting when they say there's been a weaponization of the Department of Justice. And then President Biden's own remarks last night, he decried the weaponization of the Department of Justice against his son. He blamed Congress. He blamed the problems his son had on Congress. I don't think that's actually accurate. So while I understand it from the father-son aspect, boy, there's a lot of it that just doesn't sit right. And I expect as more people settle in and look through this, it was a fairly sweeping pardon. It was an unusual pardon, a much broader pardon than Bill Clinton gave his brother back in 1999 or 2000 when Clinton left office. It was a much different pardon than that.
My last question to you is, Brandon Gill is your successor. Have you had conversations with
sure.
him, and what advice did you give him?
Oh, I'm sure I gave him a lot of advice, some of it which he really perhaps not interested in hearing. But look, he's going to make his own way in Congress, and important thing for me is he's going to be my congressman. So obviously I'll be watching. I'm interested in how I want his congressional tenure to be successful because I want my representative to be successful. But look, it's going to be a different person, a different time. There's no, I did not replicate the tenure of my predecessor, nor was I ever intending to, and I'm sure he's not intending to replicate my tenure. But he'll carve his own way and he'll make his own mark, and my prediction is he'll be ultimately very successful.
Congressman Michael Burgess, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jack.
We wish you all the best.
Thank you.